My name is Olivia Bennett, and if you had met me a year ago, you probably would have described me as an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. I was 29, living in Denver, Colorado, working as a nurse in a busy hospital, and spending my evenings in a small one-bedroom apartment downtown. To many people, my life might have seemed unremarkable, but to me, every day was an attempt to climb towards something better. I had always been full of hope, sometimes too much of it, and it often felt like hope was the only thing keeping me moving forward. This story isn't about miracles or fairy tales, though. It's about how life sometimes tests your ability to keep believing when everything feels like it's about to collapse. And more than anything, it's about the night when I thought my dreams were finally becoming reality, only to discover that reality had its own way of shaking me awake. I grew up in a small town outside of Kansas City. My parents worked hard, but money was always tight. My mom worked in a diner, and my dad fixed cars in a local garage. They did their best, and I was grateful for the love they gave me. But growing up, I promised myself that I would carve out a life that felt bigger, one that carried me further than my hometown's narrow streets. Nursing was my ticket out. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and most importantly, it gave me a chance to help people. Moving to Denver was supposed to be the start of everything new. I loved the view of the mountains, the bustle of the city, and the idea that I could blend in among strangers and start from scratch. Still, the city could also feel incredibly lonely. I'd come home from 12-hour shifts exhausted, making frozen dinners and sitting in silence while the city outside buzzed with life. I told myself it was just temporary, that eventually I'd meet people, maybe fall in love, and maybe even buy a small home of my own. That's when Ethan Walker entered my life. Ethan was a new resident doctor at the hospital. He was tall, with sandy brown hair and the kind of calm presence that seemed to ground everyone around him. Most nurses and staff admired him not just for his skill, but for his kindness. He never treated anyone like they were beneath him, and in a hospital where stress often made people short-tempered, his patience was like a gift. The first time we spoke outside of work was on a rainy evening. My car wouldn't start in the hospital parking lot, and while I sat frustrated behind the wheel, Ethan tapped on my window with an umbrella in hand. "Need a jump?" he asked, smiling in that disarming way that made everything feel lighter. That small act of kindness turned into a friendship. We started grabbing coffee during breaks, sharing late-night meals after long shifts, and talking about everything from family to dreams we had for the future. Ethan told me he had grown up in San Diego, the son of a single mom who worked 2 jobs to support him and his younger sister. He carried himself with a sense of responsibility that made sense once you knew his story. I didn't mean to fall for him, but feelings have a way of slipping in quietly. One evening, we sat in a small diner near the hospital. The place smelled like fresh pancakes and brewed coffee, even though it was close to midnight. We had been laughing about something silly a patient said earlier in the day when the conversation grew softer. "Do you ever feel like life is rushing past you?" I asked him, staring at the cup in my hands. "All the time," he said. "But I guess that's why I try to make the most of the moments I get." Something about the way he said it made me want to believe in everything again. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Hope has a strange way of making you brave. I started imagining what life with Ethan could be like. I pictured us going hiking in the Rockies, cooking in a small kitchen together, maybe even building a family one day. I knew I was getting ahead of myself, but for the first time since I left Kansas, the thought of a future didn't feel like a distant dream. Then came the night that tested everything. It was in December, and Denver had been hit with a heavy snowstorm. The hospital was short-staffed, and Ethan and I were both scheduled for a double shift. By the time we left, it was close to midnight again, and the streets were coated in snow. He offered me a ride, and I gratefully accepted. We drove in silence at first, the hum of the heater filling the car. Then Ethan spoke. "Liv," he said softly. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped. I thought, foolishly, that maybe he was about to confess he felt the same way I did. But instead, he said something that made the air in the car heavy. "I'm leaving Denver in a few months. I got offered a position in New York City." I stared at him, trying to process his words. New York. That was across the country. That's amazing, I managed to say, forcing a smile. Congratulations. But inside, my hope cracked. Over the next few weeks, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. I wanted to support him, but the thought of him leaving tore at me. Every conversation, every laugh, every late-night coffee suddenly felt like it was slipping through my fingers. One evening, I finally asked him, "Do you ever wish things were different? That maybe you didn't have to go?" He looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "Of course, but I can't let myself stop moving forward." That night, I lay awake in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, full of hope that this wouldn't just be a dream, that somehow reality would give me a different ending. The day of his departure came faster than I expected. Snow was falling again, like it had that night in the car. We met at the airport, and I tried to hold back the tears pressing behind my eyes. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. He smiled softly. "Say you'll keep chasing the life you want. You deserve it, Olivia." We hugged, and for a moment, I let myself believe time would stop. But it didn't. He walked toward the gate, and I stood frozen, watching until he disappeared. The months after Ethan left were some of the hardest of my life. I threw myself into work, but the loneliness felt heavier than before. Still, I remembered his words. Keep chasing the life you want. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I joined a hiking group, made friends outside of the hospital, and even started painting again, a hobby I had abandoned years earlier. Each small step reminded me that hope wasn't foolish. Hope was fuel. A year later, I got an unexpected email. It was from Ethan. He wrote about how tough New York had been, but how he had grown. He asked how I was doing and told me he still remembered our late-night conversations and the way I always found hope even in the darkest days. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Maybe our paths weren't finished crossing. Maybe what I had once feared was only the start of something neither of us could yet see.